Welcome to Engage. I'm your host, Ruth Todd. Thank you for joining me as we tell the story of engaged learning here at Utah Valley University. Engaged learning is the combination of traditional academic and hands-on learning, and it's a point of emphasis here at UVU. For many UVU students, that means earning a degree while simultaneously building a resume in their chosen field of study. On this program, we spotlight examples of students who are learning by doing. On today's episode, we're taking a closer look at the work some UVU anthropology students are doing with their professor, Dr. Klaus, south of the equator in Peru, where they're uncovering the remains of an ancient Andean culture.
Very broadly, anthropology is the study of people. That is to say, that it is the study of people in all places, in all times, in all ways. Anthropology is the most ambitious attempt that we human beings have ever embarked upon to try and answer that question. What does it mean to be human? Out of the original 500 columnar sockets, this is one of a very few that have survived. Anthropology, because of its scope and because of its approach towards time and people and places and history, I think has a very unique and very special potential to answer that kind of question. Here in the Pomac Forest, here at the site of Sican, and throughout the Lambayeque region and the north coast of Peru in general, what we come in contact with on a daily basis, every day that we go to work, is a part of the story of humanity that has been lost, that we don't know very much about. It's a part of history here that literally is buried, and it's also a part of history here that without our work, without our intervention, without our attempt to understand the Sican people and this place, this information would be gone forever. And it is critical to understand the totality of human history, because if we don't understand that, we have a very incomplete understanding of who we are today. And quite frankly, I don't know that we would have a clue as to the question of where are we going in the future.
Where they just sealed it off?
They sealed it off.
These are the bricks.
Yeah.
I love being outdoors, and I love mystery. Always fascinated with people and what makes their lives come together in the particular ways that they do. But it really is fascinating to imagine that there's a history of an entire culture and the individuals that make up that culture somewhere in the ground waiting to be discovered, waiting to have the layers peeled back, and then you have the mystery of trying to put the story together from the artifacts that you find.
So as what we're interested in doing here in terms of the Lambayeque Valley Biohistory Project, one is that we're trying to further understand the Middle Sican period, and also we're trying to sketch out an understanding of the population biology, patterns of health, physical activity, diet, genetic interaction patterns, information such as this, because all of these are shaped by culture. But then the other principal focus of our research at this point is to continue our ongoing excavations at colonial sites. And this is a brand new field in Andean archaeology. We've been doing lab work, studying the human skeletal remains from our excavations in the colonial cemetery of Etten, at the southern end of the Lambayeque Valley. But we've also been excavating with the Sican Museum and emergency rescue excavations at one of the pyramids in the Pomac Forest called Huaca Las Ventanas.
Our project here with Dr. Klaus is specifically to decide or make some inference about relationships of those we find buried. I think it's significant because this is a whole generation of people. There was a whole culture, several cultures that came and went of their own accord way before they had contact with European influence. We can't recognize the past culture without getting somehow behind that time period and seeing what it was they ate and did, and how they buried their dead before that influence came.
The north coast of Peru was a center of independent or autogenous cultural development. There were no outside influences in this sense. And it was a center of cultural development in Peru, which is to say quite a lot, because when we consider Peruvian prehistory, we think about the Incas, we think about grand empires coming from the southern part of Peru. What we're seeing here is a hypothetical reconstruction of the Sican capital. It's also called Sican. And in the original Muchic language of the people of this valley, the term Sican, which was the original name we understand for this part of this Pomac forest, means the house or the temple of the moon. So the site of Sican is something that when you first come here, you don't really appreciate the size of it. And my students always keep on saying that we've seen this hundreds of pictures of the site in class, and we've never really realized just how big it was. This was truly a city of the dead. It was a necropolis, and each one of these stepped pyramids was a monument. It was a tombstone to an elite lineage. With the excavations and the study of ancient skeletons here at the site of Sican is essentially to shed light on a society that has been gone and forgotten for more than 1,000 years.
When we come back, we'll see more of the engaged learning experience that UVU anthropology students are getting by piecing together an ancient Peruvian history almost entirely by their bones. Welcome back to Engage. Today we're down in Ferreñafe, Peru with UVU Associate Professor Klaus and some of his anthropology students as they reconstruct the fascinating past of this ancient valley by studying the skeletal remains of its people.
So when a student comes here and works as part of this project and is living and working here in the Lambayeque Valley, our students excavate archaeological sites. Our students take those remains back to the lab, and it's within the laboratory setting that they analyze the finds, whether they be skeletons or metal objects or ceramics. They're also involved in the conservation of the objects. So once something is excavated, that's not the end of your relationship scientifically with the object. You have to take care of it. When students are here in Peru, they get to experience a very intense cultural and linguistic immersion. When students participate in the work here in the Pomac forest, what they're also helping to do is to protect this critically endangered environment of which there is nothing else like this on the planet Earth.
Estamos excavando en esta área que es el perfil sur de Huaca Las Ventanas y estamos muy contentos de contar con la visita de los estudiantes. Es importante tener estudiantes que nos apoyen en la investigación porque se familiarizan con el tema y es un intercambio de cultura, ¿no? Entonces estamos muy contentos, muy satisfechos con su trabajo.
The type of research that we do is absolutely fundamentally designed to incorporate students. We do research through teaching and teaching through research. They become junior colleagues with whatever we're doing. So for excavating, they've become really quite responsible, and they take on, after sort of shall we say, a week or two of a very close sort of apprenticeship with myself or another archaeologist, they'll begin doing their excavations rather independently.
So what we basically do here is when we first arrived, I had taken classes on anatomy, skeletal anatomy, and when we showed up, Haken instantly trusted us and was like, all right, here's your first burial. You're gonna work on these, start collecting data on this.
Dr. Klaus arranged for me to have my own exclusive access to a sample of several individuals who had been excavated from another site, and I was allowed to go through and do the data collection.
I don't know if that's parturition, if that's the sign of childbirth, for instance. Is it bilateral? What we have come to focus on, principally, are human remains. Instead of ceramics or art styles or architecture, for instance, as being our principal focus. Human remains quite likely do indeed represent the most information-rich part of the archaeological record. In many cases, a relatively indelible record of behavior within patterns of health. If you gave me the teeth of a group of people, I'd be able to reconstruct the economic history of an entire civilization.
This is a cervical vertebrae. What I kind of can start seeing on this vertebral body is a little bit of marginal lipping around the sides, which is indicative of degenerative joint disease.
We had the opportunity to work in the laboratory with some skeletal remains of individuals who were apparent sacrifice victims.
Here at the Museo Bruning in the city of Lambayeque, which is one of our other principal museums that we work with, behind me are a series of boxes, 32 boxes from the past field season. Each one contains a victim of human sacrifice. But a very important perspective on the Chamu occupation of the Lambayeque Valley comes from the study of the human sacrifices that were discovered by my colleagues at the Bruning Museum in 2008 and 2009, and then studied by my students and myself in 2009 and 2010. So I think that when we look at the form of ritual sacrifice and the way that we see how the bodies were buried in a very traditional form of Muchik burial ritual, it really comes across, and I think there's a message, that can be read from those sort of archaeological traces that indicates that the people who were doing the sacrifices at a major Chamu political center were not Chamu. They were Muchik. They were part of the local population. What this means is that this shows us how the Chamu ran a colonial holding or an imperial holding. They were interested probably only in managing the local political structures, but they weren't after, so to speak, hearts and minds. So I think that it shows us that a brand new perspective on human sacrifice and the history of human sacrifice is starting to come into view, where we're understanding exactly how sacrifice changes, under which sorts of political and social circumstances that the religious ritual evolves. And it's with the work of our students from UVU that this completely brand new understanding is just beginning now to emerge. So one of the bigger questions that we're trying to address here through our study of the skeletal remains of the sacrifice victims here from Huaca Norte in Chotuna has to do with why the people were sacrificed. Since water comes from mountains, for instance, the offering of a child's body and blood may have a lot to do with concepts of fertility and the idea of these interchangeable metaphors between blood and between water as being the two vital fluids that circulate from this world and the world of the ancestors. We think that we have a basic idea of what the people were thinking and why they were carrying out these sacrifices. The hard, shriveled up, dried up body of a dead individual, in this case a sacrifice victim, was often likened in Andean traditions to that of a seed. You could take a seed, even though it's cold, it's dry, it's lifeless, you can take a seed, you can plant it into the ground, you water it, and from this lifeless thing, new life somehow sprouts. And so these mummies, I think, were considered to be seeds. They were the sources of fertility. They bury them in a waka, a pyramid, which was a metaphor for a mountain. It's the source of water. So they're feeding this living creature, this living being in their cosmology. This is not a pile of bricks, this is a living creature. The idea is that everything that's going on in this pyramid and everything that's taking place in this waka is to make sure that the world and the universe and life continues.
When we come back, we'll learn more from Dr. Klaus and the UVU team in Peru and find out what they're discovering through bioarchaeology about this ancient people whose level of society and culture was on par with the Incas and Aztecs. And we'll speak with Dr. Klaus right here in studio about the project and its future. Welcome back to Engage. We wrap up this episode by talking with the students about their hands-on graduate level anthropology experiences in Peru, both at the excavation site and in the lab. Using biological evidence, the students are helping to unlock some of the secrets about these ancient Peruvian societies.
What I'm doing here is I'm doing a basic inventory on the dentition of this burial. So right now, what I'm gonna first do is I'm gonna go through and clean all of the teeth pretty thoroughly.
So the first thing that we do is we dump out the bones so that we can examine them. In this case, I have a whole bag full of vertebrae.
This is our last burial that we have. We've already documented 232 burials, and this will be number 233.
Inventorying is a first part of it, so we just kind of take an inventory of what's present and what's not in the skeletal components. So in this case, I'd go through bone by bone and record what's present and what's not present.
I put them kind of in anatomical order. I start with the head up here and work my way down for the rest of the bodies.
Things that we like to look at in terms of what we're studying, we like to find evidence, see if there's evidence of childhood metabolic stress. Often that's in the form of what we call parodic hyperestosis, which we find on the exterior of the cranial vault.
When it comes to our students, my intention is to be able to provide for them an exemplary engaged learning experience. Within the philosophy of engaged learning and the way of teaching, in that sort of approach and that philosophy, but moreover to be able to have students also contribute to what we could call real-world science. When students come here, they usually have about 2 years of training with me in the classroom and in the lab, spanning coursework in ancient archaeology and archaeological field methods, in human anatomy.
We have an opportunity to actually be involved in excavation and literally be present in as the context is first encountered, and see how these individuals were in the ground in situ, see the associated material, cultural remains, ceramics, how they were placed around the burials. You could even have it described to you by someone who was there or in a book, but it wouldn't be the same as actually being there.
I believe when you can say you've been in a country, you've been hands-on involved in a powerfully reputable project, I think it's going to be a great help.
The pictures were great. Here is even better. This is enormous. This is so detailed. This is so beautiful. And none of those things I would be able to understand if I was just looking at them in class, or even looking at these burials. Like Joe Lewis has said, and Hagen always says, context is everything.
Well, it's very important during the archaeological studies formation at the university that basically you are getting at the school theoretical courses. However, when you are in the field, in this case in the museum and archaeological site, for a student it's a great experience because this is directly first hand in contact with the cultural and organic remains related with ancient human occupations, and the student can get an excellent practice skills directly working in the lab and the field.
Right now we're on top of Huaca Lercan Lech in the Bosque de Pomac, which is on the north coast of Peru. Behind me we have 2 other archaeological sites. And what's really amazing about this opportunity is just walking up here and looking at everything that we see around us. We stumbled across a sacrifice victim that had just eroded out of the Huaca. And that's definitely something you would never encounter in a classroom for sure.
When we approach bioarchaeology from a contextual point of view, we have to get the students literally and fully and deeply and completely engaged with every other aspect of the archaeology here. So that means learning excavation techniques, that means learning geoarchaeology, that means understanding the physical and chemical properties of what's behind making a ceramic vessel or a metal smelter. Out of that, I think, comes a new approach in bioarchaeology, and one that's very important to continue in the future. One period of time that we don't know anything about is a time of unparalleled social disruption, cultural collapse, cultural change, and violence. And that's the period of time when the Spanish arrived here on the coast of Lambayeque in 1532. And right now we're standing at part of the site of Etten. This is the remains of a chapel behind us that date to the colonial occupation, as well as all around us. There are the remains of the town. We'll have 5 UVU students excavating here at the chapel and also in the ruins of the colonial town. The remains of the chapel itself probably contain an intact cemetery from the late colonial period. And this is also a brand new possibility to study burials of the descendants of the people who survived conquest. So truly we'll have the students involved in all aspects of the archaeological research, the mapping, the analysis of the materials after it's excavated, and also the presentation of our data at various academic conferences and in book chapters and in books and in top-ranked peer-reviewed journals.
Compared to what I expected, This has superseded all expectation. I expected it would be a great professional experience, educational experience, but again, the friendships that we've made, the connections that we made are wonderful. We're now affiliated with a museum, several museums.
Peru has been a pretty amazing experience in a lot of different ways. As a person, as a student, you know, having this opportunity to use knowledge in the classroom in a situation where it's actually research and it's actually being recorded and counting has been really fulfilling to me.
Being able to come here and travel, I've also got to experience the culture, and this person that I'm working on right now, their posterity is still living here, and that's just been, I've really got to know the culture now, the culture then, and it's been fascinating.
As a UVU student, an undergraduate, being involved in not just classwork, not just listening to a lecture or doing really well in a class, but being at the forefront where the research is happening, where discoveries are being made. The idea of that being the case as a UVU student I'm elated. I mean, it's so exciting that we have this opportunity to be doing that, and that UVU is a part of that. I think it's really cool.
We're here with Professor Klaus. And Hagen, how are you?
Very tired. We just returned yesterday from our 7-month excursion to Peru. It's been an exhausting 7 months, but also one that's been very rewarding and extremely productive in terms of how much research and teaching we were able to accomplish.
You know, I don't think anybody would argue the fact that what you're doing down there is so fascinating. But beyond fascinating, it's really important. Tell us why studying these ancient Peruvian cultures is so significant.
I think it's significant on a number of different levels. It's significant scientifically because when it comes to telling the story of humanity and the human civilization, what we encounter in Peru is a unique chapter in that history. And I think it's something that on a scientific and a cultural level is something that enriches all of us who are alive today and for our descendants. But also, this is sort of a philosophical point of view, but I think it's also very, very real for all of us, because when we learn about the past, what we're able to do is understanding about our future.
You know, so many people, when they think of archaeology, if they have no background whatsoever, which is probably most people, they think of Indiana Jones. So, of course, that is Hollywood's version, but just for fun, treat me like one of your students and tell me what it is like when you unearth, find someone or something that is really a treasure.
Well, in many cases, I'll always have to say this, that when we encounter human remains, they're much more valuable than gold, for instance, or a gold artifact. I firmly believe that. Well, of course, you can get lots of information about a culture and their art styles and beliefs from the things that are encoded in let's say, a gold artifact. It's really the human remains for us that represent the greatest and most powerful windows on an ancient society. Because what you're able to do is you're able to really reconstruct the people from the culture, from the many different people that you actually do study. So it really requires many hundreds of burials and thousands of skeletons to study. But when you first find a person, the remains of a person, more properly, who's been dead for 1,000 years or even a couple hundred years in some of our cases, it is a very powerful experience. It is a very personal experience. While we, of course, are always endeavor to be scientific and dispassionate with what we do, you can never get away from the fact that this is a human being, or at least what's left of one, and that if you had a time machine and if you could go back in time, you know this person, there could be little doubt that you would be friends, that you would be able to understand this person and to know them. And in this sense, really what it boils down to is that when you work with the skeletal remains in excavation or in the lab, they tell you about themselves. In this respect, the dead become our teachers.
Well, I think you hear that from the students.
Yes.
These aren't skeletal remains. These are people.
Yes.
And so it has to have a lingering and continuing effect on these students as they go out in the world and continue their studies. How does it help them?
On very practical terms, there are an immensity of ways that they can apply the skills that they learn, and not just in terms of academic anthropology. So for instance, if students are interested in forensic anthropology, the techniques and the tools and the types of analysis that we use here are exactly those that we use in forensics as well, except that our question and our time periods are different.
Well, obviously all the students that you have in your classes here at UVU can't follow you down to Peru. Not everybody gets that opportunity.
I wish they could. Yeah.
Of course, and that would be optimum.
Yeah. Yes.
But for those that don't get to go, do they still benefit? How do they? They have to benefit from what you do, because it's just secondhand. It's only secondhand, and that's not too bad. So tell me how they benefit.
Well, the field work and the field research that we do here as part of my project is really designed to be able to marry research and teaching together. Because that's really what, at least in my opinion, my perspective, and the way that I do engage learning, that's one of the best ways to engage learning. And for our students, when they come to Peru, it's wonderful, and it's a singular experience, I hope, for them. But for the students here on campus, we try to bring Peru to them. And so with the many different varieties of classes that I teach here, whether they range from forensic anthropology or biological anthropology or courses on Andean prehistory, the work that I do in Peru comes right back to the classroom. And they become part of my lectures, and they become parts of the broader curriculum that I teach here in the classrooms as well.
Well, congratulations for what you're doing with them, and thank you for helping them with engaged learning.
I'm very proud of our students. I'm very, very proud of them.
Lucky to have you for sure. Thank you so much for taking some time. I know you're so busy, but you stepped over to the studio and we really appreciate it. It was absolutely fascinating.
It's wonderful to be here, so thank you.
Hey, and thanks so much. And thank you at home for watching Engage. Join us next time for more stories about UVU students who are learning by doing.